National Assembly Select Committee and partners discuss access to information bill. Somalia shows solidarity in the fight against deadly epidemic. Pura orders GSM operator to fully refund affected customers. These and more stories coming on the World Today. Do stay tuned. Hello, it's 1700 hours GMT here in our studios in Banjul. You are watching The World Today on iAfrica TV and I am your presenter, Julden Jai. In a bid to ensure more transparency and accountability in government institutions, the National Assembly Select Committee on Education held consultation with Gambia Press Union and other partners on access to information bill ahead of its passage to the National Assembly. Details of that story in this report. The National Assembly in Banjul on Tuesday engaged stakeholders on additional information on the Access to Information Bill, through which the Gambia Press Union seeks to ensure the enforcement of the right to information, especially for journalists. The bill, once enacted, will improve government's transparency and accountability through the sharing and receiving of information among the citizenry. Key partners such as persons with disabilities took part in the plenary session to argue for their rights ahead of its passage to Committee of the Whole House. Mohamed Kurubari, who represented the differently able persons, said that it is the right time for the lawmakers to cater for their needs in terms of access to information. He presented hopes that the new bill will rhyme with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the aspect of languages and accessible media.
Because you remember, for example, myself and many other blind and visual impaired don't read these print, written scripts. How do we access information? It's either through Braille, either soft copy or electronic copies or tactile. If you go to the deaf and hard of hearing, how do they access information? The information should be available to them in some cases through sign language interpretation. So you can see that there are still restrictions or barriers in terms of accessing information.
The representative for Upper Salum, Ala Jimbo, assured that the bill will also empower public bodies to be responsive to public access to information to ensure that no one is left behind.
Where a person, subsection to where a person with a disability wishes to make a request, the information officer shall take all necessary steps to assist the person to make the request in a manner that meets the needs of the person with disability, which complies with the Act. So I think, Mr. Kurbali, we just have to ensure that the entire populace, especially the public bodies, know that when you make a request, they must give you the information in a format that can easily be used by people with disability.
The Secretary General of the Gambia Press Union, Sekou Jammeh, said the international best practice requires a line ministry to oversee the implementation and coordination of the Act. Informed by research done by the union, he observed that the administration of information affairs is under the affairs of the Attorney General's chambers and not under the Minister for Information as obtained in the Gambia. Now on, the bill will be subjected to general debate, during which members will have opportunity to vote on its general principles and clauses. It will also undergo detailed investigation at committee stage, followed by a report to the National Assembly. For iAfrica News, I am Julden Jai. South African Airways has announced that it may cancel over 100 of its flights by end of February due to an embattled debt. The country's national airline carrier is struggling with debt repayments, with many of its flights already been cancelled. Analysts say the airline has nothing to do but to restructure to find a way to survive. Details of that in this report.
The airline has cancelled several flights since mid-January. At the beginning of February, it announced that retrenchments were now unavoidable.
The difficulty is that when you've got an ailing airline with challenges in terms of meeting some of the short-term targets, with huge pressure in terms of debt repayments, tough decisions have to be made. The consequences of that is obviously that SAA will not need all of the staff that they currently have, because they have less routes and obviously less need for different staff in this environment.
Some 100 flights will be cancelled by the end of February. One labour union with members at SAA wasn't surprised by the move to cut routes so drastically.
We expected a radical restructuring, and stopping loss-making routes is one of the things that was an option on the table. We're not that necessarily fussed about the announcement of the routes that are being stopped. What we are quite angry about, however, is announcing retrenchments without actually announcing your business rescue plan, which means we're basically retrenching as a knee-jerk reaction to cash flow, and that's not the way you're going to save this airline. You're not going to retrench yourself into profit.
Analysts see this as a first step in a strategy to save the airline, but they want more details.
We've got to find a way where we can support the airline, but at the same time provide a way in which the airline can provide certainty to the market, and also perhaps put a proper plan in place in terms of the long-term sustainability of the airline.
All the stakeholders involved in the airline want it to survive.
We, from the very start, said an airline like SAA can be saved, but I don't think we were under any illusions that the SAA that emerges from this process would look vastly different than the one we had before. You could not continue with business as usual. That ended up with a 6 billion rand net loss every single year.
While solutions are being sought, criticism has been levelled at the business rescue practitioners for the way they have dealt with the unions.
Our worry is, in order to enact a turnaround here, you will need all stakeholders to be completely bought in and on board. And sidestepping labour like this means that you're basically setting yourself up for failure.
While the business rescue practitioners negotiate that path between what's happening on the politics and what's happening in terms of unions, they seem to have the best interests of the airline at heart. We'll have to see if they get it right, though.
From that report from South Africa, we come back home because 8 top officials of the government-backed pressure group 3 years Jodna have to remain in custody until this Friday, when presiding High Court Judge Amina Saho Sise is expected to hand down her ruling on defense bail application. This is the third time the 8 members of the group that has been calling on President Barrow to step down are denied bail following a 3-count of unlawful assembly. Rioting after proclamation and rioters demolishing structures was pressed against them by the police prosecutors. During the Tuesday hearing of the bail application that was filed by the defense, the accused person's lead defense counsel, Rachel Y. Mendy, said the bail application have been overshadowed by a series of events. In January, the group clashed with officers of the Police Intervention Unit while amplifying their call for President Adama Barrow to respect the 3 years mandate of the coalition agreement he had with the political leaders before the 2016 presidential election. Justice Amina Saho Sise has now adjourned the matter to Friday for the prosecution to respond to defense submissions before she could hand down a ruling on the bail application. Now, from that 3 years Jodna case, we head to Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe's president, Emerson Mnangagwa, has said that the countries won't be able to participate in African leaders' plan to shift towards clean energy due to lack of funds. Mr. Mnangagwa told African leaders at the annual African Unit Summit that in Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa that the country is largely depending only on its domestic resources. Details of the report in this story.
These leaders are developing a strategy to see Africa shift towards clean energy. But Zimbabwe says it is unable to do so due to lack of funding.
If we had no sanctions, we would speak about attracting investment into the country. But because of the constraints of sanctions on us, we depend on our own domestic resources in the country and also from the private sector, global private sector, who are not constrained by the sanctions imposed on us.
But even for countries which don't face that problem, it is still difficult to attract funding for clean energy projects.
The first thing is to really look at the progressive nature of our tax system. Because again, a lot of governments would say, oh, we can't pay for it, we can't afford it. The second one, and it's something that we did in Senegal, is essentially, and it's the same in France and many other countries, you have to criminalize non-payment of tariffs. Because the reason governments subsidize is because nobody pays the energy bill. And so when the energy bill is not paid, the government has to step in. When the government steps in, the utility falls.
But climate change activists say there also needs to be a focus on education.
Part of our model at Little Ones Go Green is to make sure that while we are thinking changes, let's start with the children at a nascent age. Because once you inculcate it in them at a tender age, then by the time they are working for the UN, working for so many other non-state actors or conglomerates and corporate companies, the mentality will have changed. They will have grown with an inculcation of thinking about conservation.
The UN Economic Commission for Africa is helping willing African countries to access financing for clean energy projects. The UN Economic Commission for Africa is creating dialogue between African public and private sectors so that member states can get financiers of mega energy projects. Economic experts advise government to create relevant incentives and more favorable investment policies that will encourage private sector to take the risk to venture into the energy investment.
That report there takes us to a break, and we will come back shortly for the remaining of our stories. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. You are reminded this is The World Today on iAfrica TV, and now to the rest of our stories. Information Minister Ibrahim Silla said Africell GSM company has reached an agreement with the country's regulatory body PURA for the GSM operator to fully refund customers who complain of being affected on its unlimited 4G data bundle. Minister Silla told the GRTS Gambia This Morning show on Wednesday that when the ministry's attention was drawn to the customer complaints about their dissatisfaction on the unlimited data bundle, he met with Africell management and discussed the matter with them, and he was detailed about the issue. According to Information Minister Silla, the public regulator also had an agreement with Africell for it to immediately send SMS to all its affected customers to inform them that they will refund that. He said when Africell started the promotion some months ago, it is thought that between 12 or 17 gigabytes that is being given was enough for the connectivity for a single user event. If the user have to be on YouTube for 24 hours on a day, but it has come to realize that other devices and persons not part of the user will be connected alongside. For nearly a week now, official customers have been occupying the social media, vetting their anger and dissatisfaction on the Lebanese-owned GSM operator on its unlimited data bundle, accusing them of cheating. The complaining customers later petitioned the company to Pura, which gathered close to 500 customers who signed the petition. Now from that we move on to another story, because the recent announcement of the Gambia's economic growth by the International Monetary Fund has increased hopes of the citizens for a better tomorrow. The IMF mission chief told journalists on Tuesday that the extended credit facility will support underdeveloped countries in their quest for a more productive country. The mission holds consultation with Gambian authorities on the anticipated funds of $50 million for the country in the next 3 years. Binta Sise has more of that in this report.
International Monetary Fund mission chief said on Tuesday that the Global Finance Monitoring Agency staff level agreed with Gambian authorities on the Extended Credit Facility (ECF) will bring $50 million for the country in the next 3 years. During a press briefing at the Ministry of Finance in Banjul, 00Gmt said ECF is IMF's main instrument for support to low-income countries, saying the Gambia has built a positive track record and boast of confidence in the economy, with credit growing at a fast rate, which gave space for private sector activities, including the area of construction. The mission chief is in the country on a 3-day consultation with Gambian authorities to take stock of the 2019 staff audit program and to agree with the government on the next step of negotiation on the extended credit facility.
Very pleased to announce that we have reached an ad referendum agreement, staff-level agreement on that extended credit facility. This is our main instrument of support for low-income countries. These agreements are typically multi-year, 3 or more years. And we are expecting that the agreement would bring about $50 million to this country over 3 years, which will be for balance of payment support, essentially to strengthen the official reserve of the central bank. What enabled us to come to this conclusion? As P.S. Ada mentioned, the Gambia, yes, has built a positive track record of performance under the SMP.
One prior action that Gambian authorities should implement before going forward is related to the cabinet submission of a reverse procurement law. Last Friday, Mr. Rizoric announced Gambia's overall current economic outlook growth was about 6% of GDP and inflation is low, with the delicacy stable. He said agriculture production also declined to about 10% in 2019, saying the country could have seen a much higher growth rate if the agriculture sector has performed much better. Finance Minister Mamburenjai said Gambia is a small and vulnerable country that witnessed a very strong shock over the years.
We are very vulnerable, open to exogenous shocks. We have witnessed very strong shocks during the year. Agriculture and tourism, and their contribution to GDP is significant. But the fact that we have been able to respond in the timely with the support of our partners, I think we have been proven.
He said when the country goes into full-blown program for the agreement, the discipline must be maintained and sustained. Gambia has so far registered great success and is now looking into ways to consolidate the effort. Binta Sise for iAfrican News.
That report there by Binta Sise takes us to Somalia, because in Somalia have stand in solidarity with China in the fight against the novel coronavirus, which has caused loss of over hundreds of thousands of lives since the outbreak hit. The Asian country, the Somalian students studying in China are mainly based in Wuhan, where the coronavirus started, but none of them is reported to have been affected so far. Chinese ambassador to Somalia said his country have come up with strategic measures to contain the coronavirus. Details of that in this report.
China's ambassador to Somalia, Xinjiang, says his country has initiated several mechanisms to counter the spread of the novel coronavirus. The top Chinese diplomat to Somalia made the comments at a press briefing held in the country's capital, Mogadishu, that was attended by local and international media.
A nationwide mechanism has been put in place and the safe measures have been taken to contain and mitigate epidemic in the science-based, coordinated, and targeted manner. We have confidence, capacity, and determination to defeat the epidemic.
Hundreds of Somali students, mainly on Chinese government scholarship, reside in Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus. China says it continues to provide relevant support, including a hotline number to foreign embassies and international students, a move highly welcomed by the Somali government.
We commend China for supporting them on these challenging times. They're all well, none of them has been infected with the virus. Of course, they have the general concerns of being in a quarantine area, has its own challenges, but otherwise their health is well. And they're most of them are qualified doctors who are doing their specialization, half of them, and the other half are mainly students. So they, as much as we know so far, and we communicate with them daily, they're all doing well, and they're all mainly supporting China to combat this this challenge that we face today.
The coronavirus spreading through China and beyond has not yet been confirmed in Africa. Health workers and many African governments say they are not ready to cope with the outbreak. They, however, praise China for containing the spread of the virus. Somalia has expressed solidarity with China as it battles the novel coronavirus. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that it remains confident China will overcome this epidemic.
Our message to China is stay strong. They will prevail. They have the right leadership and the competence to come against this. And I think it's a test, and I'm sure China will succeed. Somalia stands solidarity with China because China stood with Somalia for a very long time. And during our civil war and all the challenges Somalia faced, Somalia embassy to China has never closed. So China's brotherly support to Somalia is great, and today we stand here to show solidarity with them.
Trade between China and Somalia hasn't been affected yet. The country relies mostly on imports from China. And as it struggles to create a vaccine for the virus, the message from Somalia is clear. Stay strong, China. You will overcome this epidemic.
That report from Somalia brings us to the end of this news bulletin. But for more and other stories, you can look into our website on www.iafrica.tv. And my name is Juldenya. It's a pleasure having you. Have a pleasant evening. Bye-bye.